All right, so with that, we're about to get started here. Thank you all for making the time to be here. I know that it is probably the most exciting night of your year, so congratulations. For those of you who I haven't had the fortune of meeting or seeing painfully sit through a meeting, my name is Randy Mora. I am your city attorney here in Bel Air Beach. I've been the city attorney since roughly late May, early June of last year. This is a joint meeting of a few of our boards, and the public is welcome to attend as well, to discuss public records and sunshine law and a little skosh of ethics as well. We're going to touch on these things because they materially affect you. Your life changed a little bit when you volunteered for public service. As if that wasn't gift enough, you get the joy of an attorney telling you how your life has changed. Before I begin, I'm not going to make you guys do the whole let's go around the room thing, but just by show of hands, is there anybody here who does not serve on a public office? It's just here because you are a glutton for punishment and interested. All right, so thank you, council member. So otherwise, everybody is here because they were voluntold to be here. Thank you for that. With that, I will try to keep this light. I want to keep it light, but I want to keep it informative. That said, as I suggested already, you're all adults. If you need to get up and use the restroom or get a drink, do so. If somebody calls, please step out. I ask that you do silence your phones so that we don't have too many distractions. That said, this is only valuable if you get the information you came for. We're going to go through public records and sunshine primarily. I will touch on ethics without going through a slide deck. You should all have notepads in front of you if you feel compelled to take notes or just draw doodles of me, whatever you want to do. That said, if you have questions, comments, or concerns as we go, just put your hand in the air and I'll call on you. I want to make sure you get the information you came for. Okay, so with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to start the video here and we're going to go through public records first. I know how excited you are. I know public records. No, I'm not the clerk. I'm not Patty. I'm not Kyle. Why am I sitting through something on public records? Well, I will tell you we're talking about it because it is a very, very critical part of Florida's government law. I like to joke that Florida's public records law is like the origin story for the world's greatest comic book hero. The world's greatest comic book hero is, of course, not Superman, not Batman, but Florida Man. Florida Man, as you see in the newspapers, throws an alligator into a drive-through. Florida Man goes with tells the officer that a stuffed animal was driving when he's pulled over for DUI. The reason all your relatives and friends from college send you weird articles about Florida is because every time there's some random news story, whether you're in Oregon, Mexico, or Florida, you have the ability to ask for records about it. If it's a slow news day, just make a public records request in Florida, you'll be fine. They have crazies in New York and Texas and California too. Their laws aren't always as transparent and as easy to navigate as ours. So as we talk about both the public records law and the sunshine law, we're going to be talking about both a constitutional and a statutory duty. As a constitutional matter, under Florida's Constitution, every person has the right to inspect or copy any public record made or received in connection with official business. Let's break that down a little bit. Every person. Not every taxpayer, not every resident, not everybody who's never been in a short-term rental. It's every person has the right to inspect or copy a public record. Any public record, subject to a little asterisk we'll talk about in a little bit. So your poor clerk, Patty, has and will get public records requests from a doctoral student in Spokane, Washington, an advocacy group based out of Philadelphia, which we saw just in the last week here in this community. Every person has that right. In the Florida of yesteryear, as emails became a newer thing, there were some media organizations who would maintain a terminal in City Hall and come once a week and read all the officials' emails just to see what they were going to write about. Now they can just ask for a production of those. But the fact still remains. I can tell you as I transitioned from being a private sector attorney to doing this roughly 10 years ago, I was surprised that when I wrote a memo to my client, the city commission, 2 days later, it was in the paper. Not every word of it, I'm not that important, but you get the idea. That's a public record. If I write a memo tomorrow to the city commission on something that is not exempt, which is almost everything, that memo is a public record available for inspection. And that's a constitutional right in the state of Florida. And that's repeated in Chapter 119 of the Florida statutes, that it is the policy of the state that all municipal records are open for personal inspection and copying. That's our policy here in the state of Florida. What I will tell you is from a practical standpoint, what this means and the reason all of you are here, I'll touch on it, we'll bookend. We'll do the whole military thing. I'm going to tell you what I told you. I'll tell you, and then I'll tell you I told you. So we'll start out by here's what I'm going to tell you. As a practical matter, the public records duty we have under our Constitution is a service this city provides. And you are all a part of that service, even if you didn't know it yet. You'll know it as you leave here today. But that is a duty that we all carry. And if we look at that as a service we provide akin to keeping the lights on and the streets clear, if you change your perception, which I know some of you didn't have any perception of it, but for most, public records requests are often perceived as the first salvo in a battle. They've asked for records. I wonder what this is about. They're coming at us. There's going to be a lawsuit, or they're going to make a scene at next week's meeting. Doesn't matter what they're going to do. They have a right to the record. So why don't we stop being concerned with the motivations, do the job right, and narrow what legal claims they have, because in addition to whatever legal claim they might be pursuing, we don't want to add a public records violation to that count. So that's why you're all a part of this. And I will tell you that there have been occasions where less orthodox officials like yourselves get tested on the public records law because you're not as likely to know. And so this city, like many other cities, has thought it best to make sure everybody knows so that you're not held to some impossible standard that you were never aware of. So that's why you get the joy of being here tonight. So thank you. So we talked about that it's a public record and there's a statutory duty. That is an unconditional right. It is an unconditional right, which means we can't make conditions on public records requests. You cannot require that somebody provide their identity to get a record. Yes, you can make an anonymous records request. You cannot require a flat fee. There's no cover charge. It's not a club in South Beach. If you have a request, yes, we can charge for the actual costs of the request, but we can't say it's $50 before we even look at what you said, before you ask for. You can't require that there only be a single medium. Oh, if you're going to make a public records request, it has to be on Form 420 and submitted on a Tuesday. No, I'm calling you and telling you I want this record. Please get it for me. You certainly cannot require as a condition that they just tell you their motive. Why do you want this? Why do you even need this? What's your angle here? Just ask me. Just be a man. Tell me. I've seen that play out, that dynamic play out. That's not how this should go. So what we've established why we're talking about this, but what is a public record? Short answer, a public record is all documents, regardless of their physical form, made or received pursuant to law or ordinance in connection with the transaction of official business. Fancy way of saying any document, any item that memorializes this city's business is a public record. So, sir, what board are you on? Okay, so you're on the Board of Adjustment, sir, and you work on variances and you're looking at the agenda. Let's say you write an email to Kyle and say, Kyle, I'm concerned about the application that we went over Tuesday night. I cannot continue to serve if we are going to be da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That email that you have sent Kyle is about the city's business and is most definitely a public record. Let's say you're a member of, you're just John Q. Public who sat in the back of the room. And I send an email to the board member and say, I was really proud of the way you stood up for us residents Tuesday night, and we need more people who are going to stand by and hold the line on our heights and setbacks. Thank you for what you do. That email is itself a public record. If I ask if a request is received for all communication by and between members of the public and the Board of Adjustment in the last 2 weeks, you have a responsive record and you will have a duty to produce it. You can't say, oh, well, that went to my Yahoo account. That doesn't count. Oh, well, that was on my other phone. I got 2 phones, full drug dealer status, and that's on my other phone. That's not how the analysis works. The analysis of what is and is not a public record is commanded entirely by the content of the record itself. Meaning, I can't know if something is a public record until I look at it and do that analysis. I'm presently litigating a case on behalf of a public official as to whether their phone logs on their private cell phone are a public record or not. I joke that I'm Dominican, which means by extension, I am a mama's boy. I am a Dominican prince to a very lovely older Dominican woman. And if I avoided my mom's calls for 2 weeks, we talk pretty much every day. If I avoided my mom's calls for 2 weeks, you could better believe she will look up and find out if I have a Bel Air Beach email address, an email, cityattorney@belairbeach.gov, Randall, call your mother. That is not a public record. Even though it is on a Bel Air Beach server, it's not a public record. Now, if she wrote, Randall, I saw that your city is talking about putting pickleball courts in. We have those in our community. You should look at what we're doing about it. That's a public record. Even though she's my mother, she's contacting me more in the capacity as a constituent. Here's information this city should use in its deliberative process. So when you look at whether something is a public record or not, it doesn't matter if it's electronic. It doesn't matter if it's a Facebook message, a Facebook comment, a tweet, a Reddit thread, a DM, a Snapchat. I'm going to start using words some of you might not know, NFTs. Doesn't matter. The medium is not the issue. It's its content that defines whether or not it's a public record. A very quick story that hopefully none of you will ever find yourself in. I represented a public official who received a public records request for all public records in their text messages for the last year. Well, what does that mean? That means I, or somebody, I, had to read every text message this man sent or received for a year to determine if it was a public record. Oh, well, why didn't you just look at whatever it's to Kyle and Patty? Well, if he texts Kyle and says, hey, are you going to poker tonight? Not a public record. But if he says, I can't make it to the meeting, do you have a copy of the agenda? I'd like to appear via Zoom, public record. And so you're having to look at every single message in that thread and consider that. And I tell you that just to start sensitizing you to the ways that the public records law reaches our public officials. Very rarely does this extend to our subordinate boards. I'm not trying to scare you. I recognize it can be scary, especially if this is the first time you're ever hearing this. However, it is a reality we must be aware of, because the way the courts look at what a public record is it's anything that perpetuates, communicates, or formalizes knowledge of some type of the city. So this is from a Supreme Court opinion in Florida dating back to 1980. This is a well-established doctrine. Perpetuate, communicate, formalize. That's your public records test. And it's supposed to be construed liberally in favor of openness, which is to say, and you'll see this with the Sunshine Law as well, if you think you found a way around the public records law, I'd like to commend you because you may have found a new way to violate the public records law. We will go into what that means, but generally speaking, when in doubt, we generally produce, unless there's really good legal doctrine or the absence of sufficient legal doctrine to allow us to colorably argue that that record is not a public record. Sir. Yes, thank you. It's the first bullet up there in red. Any material prepared in connection with official agency business, which is intended to perpetuate, communicate, or formalize knowledge of some type. And I'll give you an example. So while you take a moment to look at some of those judicial quotes. In a city we represent a few years back, there was an incident with somebody who was unfortunately mentally ill in the downtown area, making lewd comments to passersby and threatening them with a silver object, saying he was going to assault them. Police responded to the scene. They continued that pattern of behavior, and ultimately they were shot and killed. There was an investigation after the fact. Once the investigation closed and everything was done, the police report said that the suspect possessed a silver sharp object resembling a knife and was lunging at somebody to stab them when they were shot. So once all that was done, after the fact, when the investigations are closed, we receive a public records request to inspect, because remember it's inspector copy, to inspect the silver sharp object referenced in the police report, which of course is going to be in evidence. And so that was the question, is it a public record? Well, it formalizes the officer's knowledge of the events on scene. It certainly meets that definition, perpetuates the rationale for his action. So we made a public records production. They came into a room that was roughly the size of this podium, held up a little baggie, took a picture with their phone, and went on their way. And that was a public records request fulfilled. So that's how it's not just text messages, documents, and memoranda. It's anything that perpetuates, communicates, or formalizes knowledge of some type. Oh, we fixed the pipe because it was broken and cracked. We have photos of that. Those photos are public records. Anything that documents our knowledge. Any questions on that so far? All right. One question that often comes up from our board members, what about rough drafts? If I just, I don't get a chance to talk until the end of the meeting, I'm taking notes and I want to make sure that when I talk, I'm prepared. I've made notes. Are those a public record? I'm going to give you that wonderful lawyer answer. Well, it depends. It depends. There's two things there. If your notes are really just notes, don't forget to say that the beach cleanup is Tuesday and have a safe 4th of July and it's hurricane season, be prepared. Probably not a public record. You're just kind of gathering your thoughts. But let's say we're regulating sea turtles and you say, and you've done some fact finding. Well, the Boston Sea Aquarium says this, and in Monterey, this is how they regulate it. And now you're doing fact finding. You have data. Well, that is much more a public record than just collecting your thoughts so you don't mess up. So you'll see a division of opinion on drafts and on notes. Drafts are public records. Drafts are definitely public records. If Kyle says, Randy, we need a new contract for the city attorney services, and I send him a draft and he says, no, I wanted 3 years, not 5 years. The money's too high. Change this, change that. And he sends me back a draft and I send him a draft. All of those versions are public records, not just the final product. The same is true of minutes of your meeting. You can't say, oh, well, we don't have minutes because we haven't approved them yet. If there is a draft of your minutes, that's a public record. The audio recording of your meeting, public record. Any questions on that? Sir? Well, so you don't need to save every iteration of a document. So the question, there's a difference in the question you have there is it a public record versus how long do I keep it? The how long do I keep it is a very easy analysis. The Division of Information and Library Services has a 95-page PDF that breaks down how every form of record should be preserved based on its content. That is to say, it depends on the content of it, but generally speaking, transitory records only need to be kept for as long as their administrative value. If I call you today and say, hey, Lloyd, it's Randy, call me, while that voicemail may be a public record, maybe, because all I said is call me, who knows what it's about, but if I say, hey, Lloyd, call me, it's about that short-term rental issue. By the time he learns of the message and listens to it, that's its value. He can delete it. He doesn't have to keep it forever. So that there's sort of a division there. I'm not telling you that every single thing you write down has to be kept forever. If you have a concern about it, I would work with Patty on what are the protocols here. I'm not going to be able to answer every question in that regard. But generally speaking, if you've prepared a speech and you say, here's the speech, I was reading off of it, you may wish to surrender that just to avoid the issue later. Sir. So the question asked was, and sorry, I meant to restate all the questions. The question asked was, what if you have a document on your computer and you delete it? Can they seize your computer and try to restore the file? What I would tell you is if you're deleting the file to avoid the public records law, that's a bigger issue. You can't go full Enron. However, if you the question is going to become, did you have the file? Now, if you sent, let's say you drafted a proposed agenda and then you sent it to Patty, or you sent it to Kyle, or you sent it to somebody within the city. The fact that it now exists on a city server, you can delete, you have a copy of the document when it's asked for. So that's one way that I will tell you your best bet as we talk about it is get things out of your possession and in the possession of the people who are principally responsible for these things. And you minimize the issues in that regard. Sir.
So if you're in one of these meetings and you're given a handout ahead of time to read and start making notes on to read yourself in the upcoming meeting, is that now a public document?
It can be a public record. It depends on what you're writing. But if it's just as simple as, I don't agree with this, what about this question, lacking facts, something so you're prepared for the meeting, it is a public record. However, you don't need to keep that forever. It has its value until you get to the meeting. Now you've relayed your thoughts into the microphone. You don't need to keep that. That's probably not, it may not be a public record to the extent it is or could be construed as such. Its retention values for your use at the meeting, you used it at the meeting, you're done. Again, if you used it as a place where you started taking down notes about facts and fact finding, I've researched this, what they do in Montana, California, the sheriff says this, there's a judicial opinion that says that. You may wish to keep that longer because that's a little bit more factual. You may wish to just surrender and say, hey, Patty, here's the notes I took. In some communities, I will tell you there's a difference of opinion on drafts and notes. I'm not going to, well, not drafts, but generally notes. And again, and I've talked to the people whose job it is in the archiving office. Their analysis generally goes to, if it's just stuff for you to collect your thoughts, probably not. When you start getting into real research is when you start creating a record that may warrant longer preservation. It can be if you're concerned about it. I'm not suggesting that, but there's nothing in the law that requires you to take notes, to document everything. But that is how some people operate as a result. I generate volumes of content on a daily basis. Kyle and I talk quite literally at least twice a day during the week. We talk twice a day, and in between it may be a text message, hey, I missed you, an email, hey, did you see this? Those emails and text messages are usually public records. Usually. If I text them and say, hey, how did your kid do at Little League? Not a public record. So, there's sort of that division. But I will tell you that the takeaway will be from this, it may not be that don't write everything down, but for some, I'm sure you've heard that cliched phrase of sing like no one can hear you, dance like no one's watching, and write every email and text message as though it will be read aloud at deposition or printed in the paper. If any of you communicate with me in writing, I think Ron's seen a little bit of this, Mr. Siganek seen a little bit of this, Kyle's certainly seen this. The way I'm talking right now is a lot more colloquial, a lot faster. My emails are highly formalistic because I know that potential exists. And making jokes and things don't come through later. People, if I write like, oh, I could just kill him for doing this. And later it's like, oh, so you threatened to kill a public official? I'm like, no, man. But you're never going to make that defense. So write as though that the audience is someone other than the one person you're sending it to. Because later on, some 20-something lawyer is going to be reading it and making a case of it for something. Or some citizen activist or otherwise. So be mindful of that. So we've talked about the why and the what. So let's get to the who. Who's responsible for all of this? On some level, obviously you, otherwise we wouldn't be wasting your time. That really comes down to that whole idea that the 9/10 of the law is possession. Who has the record? For some of you, especially our council members, when you're elected to public office, you receive an email address. Randy Mora at BelAirBeach.gov. That's not some fringe benefit. There is no fringe benefit. The best day of public service is when you're elected or appointed. It's downhill from there. There's no benefits. You get more headaches. You got to spend a Wednesday night listening to some devilishly handsome lawyer talk at you. There's no real upside beyond the warm fuzzy feeling in your heart, right? So the reason you get that email address is because the city can now index and search those files when they get a public records request. A reminder, somebody else is reading your emails, or at least has the capacity to. So if that's a concern for you, fine, you can do your business elsewhere. That doesn't change that it's a public record. It changes whose job it is to produce it. If Patty has it, it's Patty's job. She's the custodian of records here as a matter of statute in the city. But if it's just your Facebook account, Randy Mora at Commissioner, Commissioner Randy Mora on Facebook, and I'm the only person with the username and password, and I've got the list of who is banned and the content and the posts, then I'm the custodian, and now that's my job. So if you do city business, hey, I see that you've applied for a variance in the city, I'm on the board, which please don't do that anyways, but if you're sending a message to an applicant, that's a public record. Even if it's on your phone, it's a text message only you have, then you have the responsibility, because the custodian of records, every person who has custody of a public record shall, not could, not maybe, shall permit the record to be inspected or copied at a reasonable time under reasonable conditions. And I'll get to your question in just a second. What that doesn't mean is when you leave here tonight and you go to Publix because you forgot to cook and you got to get the rotisserie chicken, that somebody could say hey, weren't you at that meeting about public records? I'd like to inspect your phone. No, that's not a reasonable time. The chicken's only going to be hot a little while. That's not how that works. You should definitely acknowledge that they're asking for the record, and you will produce it at a reasonable time. But right now, I'm trying to have dinner before 9. Good night. Please give me your contact information. How would you like me to follow up with you? But now is not that moment. You are not hostage everywhere you go to this law that way. Sir. So the question was, if I'm communicating with a council, if I'm on a subordinate board and I'm communicating with a council member or with Kyle, would it be wise to copy the city clerk? Short answer, yes. Sending it to Kyle or a council member is probably fine enough because it's already on the city server at that point, just as a function of how this city operates, but it can't hurt because it's just an acknowledgement, it's a tacit acknowledgement of what's already true. Patty's going to have the responsibility for indexing this and accessing it at a later date. You've made it a little easier because maybe it'll sound familiar to her. But that is, yes, that is a practice some do. Certainly, I will tell you, listen, all of you are in this because you're half decent people, I presume. I usually start by doing something I forgot to do. Thank you. I've said this to my commission recently and I mean it. Thank you. None of this works if you people don't do this. You are volunteering your time and that is not lost on me. As cynical as I am as an attorney, I have a small little Grinch heart in there that really believes in what we do here. And that altruism doesn't feed on people saying I'm doing it for my ego. It's on people like you volunteering your time and recognizing that if your community is going to continue to look the way you want it to and do the things that you value, you need to be a part of that process and steward it. So thank you. And with that comes this added burden. And I'm sorry for that, but it's true. So here we are. And so with that, yes, if you are doing business on your Yahoo and Gmail accounts, you're here. The part of that thank you was you're here because you're community leaders. You were, presidents of banks and volunteer community leaders, former school teachers, ex-military, former cops, whatever it was that brought you here. And now you're in this community and you're part of the Bel Air Beach Community Foundation or the Rotary. People know you. They know how to reach you already. You may become slightly more accessible, but they already have an established way of communicating with you. So if somebody reaches you on your Gmail account or your business account, because that's how they find you ordinarily, but they want to now talk to you about city business. Hey, Ron, I want you to know that the CAC is going to have a measure coming up on finance, and I think they need to consider this, sent to your personal Yahoo account. What I recommend my public officials do is if you have a city account, and I don't know if all our boards do, but if you have a city account, forward the email there and respond from there, or reply from your account and copy that city account or the clerk and say, thank you for your email. If you have a separate account, let them know. Hey, I'm Councilmember Roberts. If you wish to reach me about city business, please on a going forward basis, email me here. It just makes it easier for us to keep track of these things and ensure that you're not falling between the cracks. So you show that you're doing this for them, right? I want to make sure your needs get met, not do it because it makes my life easier. And say, and I've copied the clerk here, going forward, please reach me here. Or please, or you just blind copy the clerk and don't make it a thing. And then that way, it got onto a city server. That's how I suggest people handle that. It's forwarding those messages on. Yes, sir.
I'm having this issue. I don't know what to do about my easement. What is the law? That now public record. These might be
So yes, sir.
because I'm now representative of the city.
The question was asked, if I serve on a board and somebody, for example, the Board of Adjustment, and I receive an email from my neighbor that says, hey, I'm trying to build a shed. My property's a little weird and I got to put it maybe 2 feet closer than I really want to, but and the code I think says I can't. How do I go about that? Is that a public record? It most certainly is. Even if it's your neighbor, even if it's your old college roommate, the godfather of your children, does not matter. They're contacting you about city business. And especially if you reply and say, please see section 2-348 of the city code. Please don't give legal advice, by the way. But if you said like, well, there's a whole code on variances, you can find it on Muni Code. And if you have questions about forms, our city manager is Kyle Riefler. Here's his email address. Let's say you reply that way. That's definitely a public record. And especially if you're going to start saying, here's who you should contact, just copy those people. And now back on the city server, hashtag not your problem. All right. So some of the questions to ask yourself. Yes, sir.
That requires reporting of that if you identify yourself as a park.
So the question was asked, maybe a resident starts talking to you. Maybe they know you're on a board, maybe they don't. But in the course of the conversation, it's revealed that you're a member of the board. Hey, I'm on the Parks and Rec board. I'm just out here playing a pickleball match. And somebody says, yeah, you never notice how court 3 always got that divot? It's got that dead spot. Yeah, I wonder how we'd get the city to do anything about it. And you're like, well, actually, I'm on the board and da 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 da. No, the question was, do I have to record that event? No, you do not. You do not have to record that event. There is no affirmative obligation to create records. In fact, and I'm going to get to this in a moment, when somebody makes a public records request in the state of Florida, we only produce the records we have. We do not have to create records. It is not, some people hear a few buzzwords and they get them caught in their head. Oh, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. I want this information. Good, but if we don't have a record about it, we don't have to make the record. So periodically, our city might receive a request for something. I'm going to make it a little absurd, but for something like, let's say we maintain our own police department. I would like you to fill in the following chart. It's going to have in one column the officer's name, their badge number, their date of hire, their rank, their favorite color, and who their first kiss was with. And our response to that is going to be, we don't have any records meeting this description. No responsive records produced. Now, of course, we have records of who our officers are, and of course, we know their badge numbers and their ranks. And we could say, we have this org chart, we have this payroll sheet. But as far as what their favorite movie is, their favorite color, who their first kiss was when they first went to Disney, we don't index that information. Now, if we did, as part of our hiring documents, then we produce those records. But we will not say, we do not have a chart that looks like that. We don't have to produce that any more than you have to go home and start going full Doogie Howser. Today I met somebody and creating a record. You don't have to do that. There's no Dear Diary obligation here. Okay. So the question becomes, how do I know if I'm the custodian of the record? How do I know if I'm assuming this responsibility? Well, there's some questions you can ask yourself. Are you the only person with custody of it? Are you able to transfer that record to the clerk or somebody else designated for it to be responsible for it? Are you using government issued devices? Not dispositive, but it's helpful to know if it's a government issued device, less likely that you're the only person to access to its data. Does the government have access to login credentials? Who's ensuring preservation? How do you handle a dynamic record? A dynamic record, dynamic versus static, is a record that changes. And this is my word of caution to you on social media. I recognize it is a very low cost, effective way to reach a large group of people. The challenge with social media is that the record does not stay the same. The classic example I give is under the last presidential administration, one of the cast of characters was a gentleman named Anthony Scaramucci. He was a press secretary. When Scaramucci was hired, most people didn't know who he was. Who was this guy? So they do a deep dive in his social media history. And he has a tweet from like 2011 that says something like, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take," attributed to Albert Einstein. That wasn't it, but something like that, some cliched phrase, unironically attributed to definitely the wrong person. And once he was hired to this position, that tweet 8 years later, or rather like 6 years later, became one of the most retweeted tweets in all time, most subtweeted with comments and all these things. So let's say in 2012, a year after he makes the tweet, he prints out a copy of it and says, "I have the public record in case somebody asks." Let's say he was a city official. He's got the record. But 6 years later, when there's all these comments about it, he no longer has a full accounting of the record. The record can change. So be mindful of that. If you have a record that has the capacity to, and in fact does change, that responsibility may complicate that, because if someone asks later for, "I'd like all the comments made in the last 2 years," oh, well, I printed it 3 years ago. You hopefully still have access to that record, right? So something else to consider there with social media. We talked about records retention. A public record is not required to be eternally preserved. I joked a little bit, there is a guide for how long a record is preserved. It depends on the content of the record. You're going to look to that guide. Long story short for you folks, don't make that call yourself. If you're in a position of having to decide that or research it, turn to your custodian of records, turn to your city attorney, and we will help you navigate that if that really is an issue. What you do have an obligation to do, and the reason that I make sure that you folks, we in part make sure you folks sit through this, is understanding that a custodian of public records and his or her designee must promptly acknowledge a public records request and respond to the request in good faith in a reasonable time, blah, blah, blah. But there's a little bit of like second grade conflict resolution, young adult therapy involved. If I come up to you and I'm saying, "Hey, I'd like to see that record," I don't get to say pound sand. I have to say, not in these words. Please don't use these words. This is very lawyerly. But I hear that you're making a public records request for all maintenance records for the bricks installed by BBCF and paid for by the city. The city is prepared to produce those records in a timely fashion. How would you like those produced? That's what it sounds like when Patty does it. There's some version of that. She's got a script. There may be charges associated with this. Any down payments will be returned if they're not expended, blah, 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 blah. But for people out there in the field, your job is to have your antenna up and know when someone's asking for something. If you're at the end of a variance hearing and you're trying to make your way to go buy that rotisserie chicken at Publix, and somebody who's been sitting in the back of the room says, I didn't know you guys did this. I find this really interesting. If I wanted to know which variances you granted in the last year, how would I get that? Loosely resembles a public records request. They're not necessarily asking it. There's a little bit of a hypothetical there, but you know that sounds like a public records request. You could say, if you wanted that information, you can get it. If you're asking for that, I suggest you contact the city clerk tomorrow. She can be reached right here, or you can walk right in here tomorrow. You've acknowledged that they've asked for it, you've affirmed that they can get it, and you've shown them how to do it. That's really the takeaway of this presentation for you folks. What we want you to learn by sitting here is that you are all part of this team, Team Bellar Beach. And Team Bellar Beach knows it has a constitutional and statutory duty to fulfill public records requests, and you're part of that. I'll give you an example of a somewhat absurd example of that. I was sitting at a meeting in another beach community as their city attorney. It was sort of a work session on beach renourishment and beach preservation. Not a controversial issue at all. And during that meeting, they brought every 3- and 4-letter agency in the state of Florida to talk about what you could and could not do in sand dunes. You can't plant this, you can plant that, you can't remove anything. And one of the things that one of those agencies said was, if you're going to remove sea oats, you need a permit to do so, or some other form of vegetation. Or if you're going to plant them, you need a permit to do so. I was drawing doodles at the time, I don't know. But you need a permit to do some kind of activity involving vegetation in the sand dunes. So later on, once they're all done making their presentation, somebody comes up in public comments and says, our city has periodically planted or removed vegetation from them several times over the last 10 years. And I bet you they don't have any permits. I bet you if we looked for them, this city wouldn't even know how to find those permits. And I went full Kanye West and interrupted him and said, sir, I'm going to let you finish your public comment, but it sounds like you're making a public records request of my board. And this city takes that responsibility very seriously. So you can conclude your statement, but when you're done, I'm going to meet you on the side so I can make sure I have a full understanding of your public records request, and we'll fulfill it. Now, of course, once I get to the side, he expresses great surprise at having met an attorney who doesn't know what a rhetorical question is. But I will tell you that had I ignored that statement, the very next meeting would be, I said it into a microphone, check the audio, check the minutes. I made a public records request, and this city, not only do they probably not have the record, they didn't even follow up, which is a duty they definitely should know about. Forget the permits. So I asked before you got in country, and I got nothing. What else is our city hiding from us? That would have been the very next meeting. So you acknowledge. I don't like to talk in a meeting that way, contrary to what you might have seen in some videos. But that's the job. We have to acknowledge. We have to make sure we're facilitating that process. Any questions on that so far? All right, so I'm not expecting you to be able to read all that. The point there is that everything that we do that perpetuates, communicates, and formalizes is a public record. There are limited exceptions. Some things are confidential, some things are exempt. Yes, there is a difference. The phone number, excuse me, the home address of a sitting judge, it's exempt from public record. It's confidential information, actually. It's confidential, their home address. So if you were to produce their personnel record is a public record. Their home address, redacted. But what we don't do is we don't say, oh, you can't have their personnel record. There's confidential information in there. No, we identify the confidential information, we redact it, and then we have to say based on what statutory provision we're relying for that exemption or confidentiality. We don't get to say, I'd like to give it to you, but it feels kind of icky. Or that doesn't really seem polite to ask how much people make. We have a budget, it's public. If you want to know, you can know. It may not be polite, but it is still the law. So when there are public records requests and we're concerned about confidential or exempt information, do not make that call yourself. If you're in the position of being asked to help us with a public records request, don't produce 7 of the 8 records and decide number 8 is withheld because you say so. That's a good way to violate the public records law. Because the public records law is what we call a strict liability law. It doesn't matter what your motives or your intentions were. You either did it right or you didn't. End of analysis. If you were supposed to produce 12 text messages and you gave us 11, public records violation, right there. So when we talk about the public records law, let us, me, your city attorney, your city manager, and your city clerk navigate that and decide, thank you for giving it to us. We're not going to give them this one. But don't decide that for yourself. And I know what some of you are thinking. We've been talking about chapter 119. So I'm sure if we're talking about confidentiality and exempt stuff, Randy, I could just go look at like 119.007. That's where the top secret stuff will be. No, your laws are written by lawyers like job security. So in order to find all of these exemptions, there's like an Easter egg hunt throughout Florida statutes. I've not completed the scavenger hunt yet. I've tried. Every time I get a request, I find a new one. Last year, maybe 2 years ago, I was asked to produce the payroll records for a police department. And I had this Excel spreadsheet with pivot tables and everything. And there was one column that had deferred compensation. I went column by column and searched, and I learned that day that column JJ had confidential information in it. I just had to search. Is there anything about this? Is there anything about that? I had no reason to know that. But deferred compensation contributions by law enforcement, exempt from the public records. And I have to cite the statutory and say, and on that basis, I black out that column and I say pursuant to 119 dot whatever it was, we're not producing that column. You have everything else. So don't make those calls yourself. I worked with one city many years ago where we were producing records and a clerk was like, oh, I know we don't produce people's salaries because like I was taught that when we started working here. It's like, okay, can you show me where they got that from? Oh, well, Cindy said so. Okay, we go talk to Cindy. Oh, well, Donna said so. And it's like lore passed down through the ages with no substantiation. So if someone's telling you that something's confidential or exempt, play the cynic a little bit and ask, where are we getting that from? Or can you have the city attorney show me the how and why of that so we're good? Any questions on confidentiality and exempt stuff? I will tell you there's not a lot of joy in being a municipal lawyer these days, but getting to tell people no every now and again just feels right. You get nothing, you lose. Good day, sir. It's one of my favorite scenes in film. And so I'm just saying, don't be the person, don't be Gene Wilder. Let me be Gene Wilder, just for a moment at least. A little bit of levity, but it does stand that you should let the people who do this for a living weigh in on the issue. We can charge for public records. Usually our commissioners and council members are more concerned about this. Well, what if they're asking for our clerk to work a whole day on this? What can we do about that? She's got other stuff to do. He's got other stuff to do. We can charge for the extensive use of information technology or personnel services. Just this week, I made a public records request of the city of St. Augustine because I went there on a field trip with my son and I noticed they have a public marina and we've been talking about our public marina and dock slips. And so I said, public records requests. For your policies, administrative guidance and resolutions on wait lists and priority for your boat slips. And I got the full thread back. They sent me their ordinance. The harbor master sent me an answer. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And when I say he didn't have to, he did an information response, not a record response. But I saw in sending that to the harbor master, the clerk or whoever was responsible for that said, please let me know if you have any records responsive to this. And if it's going to take you more than 15 minutes to investigate, gather, and produce these records, please provide me an estimate of your time so that we can charge appropriately. It did not apparently take him all that long to send what he sent me, but just know that we can charge for those things. The charges have to relate directly to the efforts exhausted, meaning if Lloyd makes a request and we don't have he makes a request for all building permits for 123 Gulf Boulevard for the last 20 years, bear of a request. We can do it. We have to do it. The absurdity of a request, by the way, does not dictate what we do. We still have to do it. So we go through the 20 years of permitting records, we get it together, costs us $300 and we give it to him. And Mike says, sorry, Mike, Councilmember Zabel says, I heard Councilmember Roberts made a public records request. I'd want to see what he got. Please don't do that, guys. But like, let's say he did. Remember, John Q. Public says, I heard Councilmember Roberts made a public records request. I want a copy of that production. Well, if we still have a copy, we should have made ourselves a copy of it so we know what went out. And so when somebody asks for it, if all we have to do is click send on a PDF or put it on the top of a copier and press start, it's no longer $300. It might be $30 for the pages, you know. And so that informs the analysis. And it has to directly relate. When charging for records requests, we generally advise our cities to get the costs up front. If it's going to cost $30, if we think it's going to cost $30, try and get $30 up front, or at least a good faith down payment. Give me $15 and we'll get started. You don't want to be in a position of sending your constituents to collections because they didn't pay the $30 but you really need it because they were supposed to pay it. You told them. Usually you want to get the payment before you release the record. There are penalties for violations of the public records law. I deliberately put these at the end because truly thematically, I don't want you doing it because you might get in trouble. Do it because we're supposed to, because it's the right thing to do, because it's a service we provide. But you can get in trouble with the public records law, with any criminal law or civil violation. Typically, you have what we call a mens rea and an actus reus. If you go back to law school, mens rea is what were you thinking? The actus reus is what did you do? It's the difference between, for most of us, manslaughter, first degree. Did you plan it or was it an accident? Well, that's a different violation, right? So in the same vein, I told you it doesn't matter. A violation is a violation, and that's true. If you just commit a violation, you're subject, excuse me, to a non-criminal infraction punishable by a fine not exceeding $500. But if you knowingly do it, yeah, I knew that it was a public record, but I burned it in front of them. Okay, different violation. Willfully and knowingly, you went a little deeper, different violation. And so the penalties increase, but the baseline penalty is if you were supposed to have and you didn't, it's up to a fine up to $500. Here's the why we told you, why you're here again. I've told you it's a service, a responsibility, and you're all part of Team Bel Air Beach. Well, it's 2023 now, about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a bit of a trend in public records law where people would make burdensome requests or make requests of people who were less sophisticated on the issue in the city and trap them, basically trap you in a public records violation. Let's say a city operates a municipal marina, and during the summer, you get a few teenagers or 20-somethings to swab the decks and keep things polished. Well, what they would do is go out during the summer with a camera here, or maybe on a tie or something, or on a hat, and go up to the 17-year-old and say, hey, this is a publicly operated marina, right? Yeah. I'd like to see the slip agreement for slip 19. I'm sorry, what? Take the AirPod out, what? I'd like to see the slip agreement. I'm sorry, who are you? Do you need to know who I am for me to get this? It'd be helpful. And they would walk them through every violation. Who are you? Why do you need this? Yeah, what do you need? Are you saying you need me to write it down? Well, I've got a mop and a bucket. Yeah, write it down, man. And they would get through all of those, and then they would leave. Then they would send that video to your city manager or your city attorney and says, looks like your folks don't know how the public records law works. And we're going to sue you for this violation of the public records law. And when you lose, because this is basically a civil rights law, you're going to have to pay your lawyer and my lawyer, in addition to releasing the record. So how do you want to play this? $4,000 will settle right now. Or you could fight it and lose 10 or 12 or whatever else. So a lot of cities pivoted to doing this. We'll spend the money to train our people. This is on retainer, nobody get alarmed. But we'll spend the money to train our people rather than have to pay their lawyers. But that's what would happen. And in a county like Pinellas County, there's 26 cities. Let's say 50%, you can hit 12 in a day easily, especially if you just go down Gulf Boulevard. 50% of those mess up, six cities, 6 times $3,000 to $4,000. It was worth it to do this civic activism. And I tell you, I know I've said it a few times. I'm a lawyer. I've got smaller kids, middle school age, almost kids. And when they ask what dad does, I just tell them, Daddy's a storyteller. That's all I am. I'm a storyteller. And if I can make my story align with the rule book, even better. That's when Daddy wins. So there's competing narratives here, right? While it is a villainous way of doing it, I think, it's not totally villainous, right? Because the one narrative is, it's in our Constitution, it's in our statutes, it's in their charter, that they are supposed to be transparent and accountable to us and make records available to us. And if every employee doesn't know that, then they can't do it, then they're not fulfilling their obligations to us as citizens. Now, how you go about making that point is a whole different analysis, but that's the argument. And our competing argument is we're a small city. Cash strapped, resource strapped, we're doing the best we can in service to our residents. If you just would have come and talked to Patty on Tuesday, she would have helped you. We weren't trying to deny it. We shouldn't have to pay for that. So we train. The other thing that happened as a result of that is you could see here, requests often tested the nuances of the law. In one beach community, Gulfstream, other coast, 900 people as a resident, municipal staff of 4. In a year, they received more public records requests than the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And the people were making the requests, and then by the time you produced them, they weren't picking them up. They were already moved on to 2 or 3. It was just testing. It was really, there was a little bit of a vindictive thing going on there, but that's how that goes. Records case cost Lakeland 160 grand. That wasn't the penalty. That wasn't like, and we're fining you 160 grand. That's what it cost them to pay their lawyer and the other side's lawyer as they litigated the issue. And it involved a flat fee on public records requests, which you can't do. So the way the law changed is if you have a certain notice published, which we have, prominently published, that says the office of the city clerk is the city's custodian of public records, where all official records of the city are routinely created, received, and retained, and any request should be directed to the custodian at address, phone number, email. If you have these things posted on your website, in your city hall, they have to give you 5 days notice before they sue you. Basically, okay, so you ask the teenage kid on the street, but we made it very clear how to find us. So before you sue me, you got to find me and give me a chance to fix it. So what's happened is, pardon me for a moment, what a lot of cities have done, and your city has this too, is created business cards. I joke with my officials and my employees, this is the only get out of jail free card you'll probably ever actually get. And what it is, for this one, it's a different city, but on one side it says, we are happy to produce the records. Please contact the city clerk's office. We'll provide the records as soon as possible. And on the other side, it says public records request contacts. It has their title, their phone number, their fax number, their email address, the website, in person or by mail at City Hall with the address and the hours of operation. It's basically, I'm not your guy, I'm not your gal, but this is how you find them. So that when Public Works worker number 3, Public Works tech number 3 is out there digging a ditch in the summer heat, and somebody says, I'd like to see the work request that sends you out here at 9 a.m. on a Friday. That's outrageous. Show me the work request. That's a public records request. It's an outrageous one, but it is one. Here you go, ma'am. This is how you get that. I'm going to go back to digging my ditch. And I don't mean that derisively. I just mean that's the job at the moment. So with that, the law changed so that if we have that posting, we have some protection and it's not automatic fees. I was just reading a judicial opinion this afternoon on a case where somebody was arguing, when I made the request, that was my 5 days notice. And the court said, no, that's not how that works. You make the request and then you give your 5 days notice. They're not one and the same. The city ended up having to concede that violation because it took them 5 months to respond and produce the record. That is not a reasonable time period, by the way. So that's a whole different issue, but things to consider. So again, beware of traps as you navigate the public records law. And the best practices for you folks leading out of this is know who the custodian of the record is. Generally, our city clerk here, it's Patty Gentry. Do not insist the individual identify themselves, their affiliation. Don't insist. They reduce it to writing. I'm not telling you you can't be a human person. If someone asks you for a record, and again, this really shouldn't happen to you folks, but if it does, you don't have to say, I'm sorry, you can't, it's not a violation of the law to say, I'm sorry, what was your name? It's when you condition it that way. So if you have the natural inclination to ask who the heck is talking to me, that's okay. Just don't double down. If they say, do I need to identify myself? No, sir, you don't. No, ma'am, you don't. I was just asking to be polite and figured it would help me get you the record. But so it's okay to have normal conversation, just don't make it a condition of the production. So that was easy. Perpetuate, communicate, formalize. That's public records. I'm going to transition to sunshine law to again be respectful of your time. But with that, are there any questions about the public records law that we didn't address yet? Just crushing it out here. Okay. I want to apologize to anybody watching this video. That is a very unflattering image on the screen at the moment. One second. I'm going to get back to sharing the screen here. All right, so we were in chapter 119. We're leaving chapter 119 in the rear view, transitioning to chapter 286, the sunshine law, where the rubber meets the road for you guys. This is where the real work happens as members of public boards and bodies. So welcome to Florida, the Sunshine State, as we drive forward, public meetings and an opportunity to be heard. Let's see if I can get this to work. One second, I'm gonna, it's not gonna work. Not going to work with all the everything we got going here, so I'm just going to skip over it. But public meetings are an opportunity to be heard. This is a clip from the show Parks and Rec. If you haven't watched it, it is the best representation of local government you will ever see. It captures all the absurdity, all the earnest dealings. In this particular one, it culminates in a woman's public comment saying, "I was walking through your park the other day and I found a sandwich on one of your benches and I want to know why it didn't have mayonnaise on it." Which sounds silly, but it's a little bit of what we can see in some of our meetings. My favorite public comment, by the way, that same meeting I was telling you about with sea oats and sand dunes, a woman came forward. This was circa 2017. So 2016, 17. So we've got ISIS in full swing, a lot of geospatial issues. A woman comes to the microphone and says, "There's a lot of dangers in this world today, and sand spurs is one of them." And she proceeds to explain how stepping on a sand spur can lead to a cut, which can lead to an infection, which can lead to amputation. She was outraged because sand spurs are one of the protected species you're not supposed to remove from a sand dune. So never a dull moment in local government. But again, I told you last time, we're going to start with our constitutional duties. Our constitutional duty here is that all meetings of our public body shall be open and noticed to the public. Shall, again, all the meetings. Reflected again in Florida statutes, chapter 286. Public meetings should be open to the public at all times, and no resolution, rule, or formal action shall be considered binding except as taken or made at such meeting. And you have to provide reasonable notice of all your meetings. So it's Constitution and statutes. The next thing we look at is the common law. That's just what fancy word for what judges say the law means. Any gathering of the members where the members deal with some matter on which foreseeable action will be taken by the board should be a public meeting. The statute should be construed so as to frustrate all evasive devices. That's if you think you found a way to get around it, you found a way to violate it. Real thing I heard once. "Oh, don't worry. I just wrote it on a napkin and left it in his mailbox." Still a message between two board members, still a problem. The fact that it wasn't on official letterhead is not the solution. The law must be broadly construed to affect its remedial and protective purposes. That's what the Sunshine Law is about. By the way, just a fun little anecdote. The Sunshine Law is not just great, clever branding because we're the Sunshine State. It actually comes from a famous jurist's letter to one of his girlfriends, his girlfriend at the time, who said, "I think the affairs of men would be better if the sun were allowed to shine in and disinfect all this corruption." I'm paraphrasing. He later put it in an article in the Atlantic, but it started in a letter to his lover. So just, men, step up your game here. So we talk about perpetuate, communicate, formalize when we were talking about public records. The key thing here in public meetings, notice, location, and minutes. And I'll add public comment as sort of a part of that, but notice, location, minutes. That's the thing that makes a public meeting a proper public meeting. Notice was given of this because we're all here talking potentially business. So to avoid any issue, we gave notice of this. It's in a location that is open to the public. Minutes are going to be taken. Kyle is going to write down, convened, presentation given, adjourned. There's no real votes happening tonight, so there's a lot less to talk about. But notice, location, minutes. That's what makes a proper public meeting for purposes of the Sunshine Law. So let's start about the first one, notice. What kind of notice do you need? Standard lawyer answer, it depends. The notice we give for Ian is off the coast and we're implementing emergency measures is very different than the notice we give for we're changing the skate park hours by resolution, right? We're increasing the pay of the council members. Very different from we are downzoning the industrial sector to a low density residential sector. That's land use. Notice is going to be really high. So something to consider. Your notice is different based on what you're doing, but it must be reasonable. A board or commission must provide reasonable notice of all its meetings. Notice must be reasonable under the circumstances, which vary. The Sunshine Law does not mandate an agenda announcing each item, but be cautious because when you're suddenly adding controversial items, there may be an argument that you're trying to subvert the openness and noticed element. I will tell you that the spirit of the Sunshine Law strongly favors an agenda, and your city attorney strongly favors an agenda. I don't like going to a meeting and not knowing what's going on. As Yogi Berra famously said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. So if we don't have a plan, our night can go a lot of ways. Enhanced notice. On occasion, statutes require more notice, usually around land use. So with our boards of adjustment, our planning and zoning commission, when you're talking about comp plan amendments, heightened notice sometimes. Meeting location. It can't have a chilling effect All persons are prohibited from holding meetings in any facility or location which discriminates on the basis of sex, age, race, creed, color, origin, or which operates in a manner as to unreasonably restrict. If you're having a hearing on housing in your community and you're having it at the Hall for the Daughters of the Confederacy, probably not a great idea. I'm not making any value judgments, and if you don't know why that might be a problem for a sector of your community, read a book. So that's something to consider. It can be a challenge. ADA accessibility, you see when you come to your city hall, it has a ramp. It has multi-floor facilities, have elevators. At this point, 30 years later, we're all pretty comfortable with that. Many years ago in Florida, actually in one beach community in Pinellas, it used to be that for the purpose of meetings, City Hall would be the home of whoever was mayor. And so they would have their meetings there. This is a Florida of yesteryear. In modern Florida, that place would have to be equipped for people with disabilities to have some access to that meeting. Meetings can be held out of town with some demonstrated rationale. I'm not going to get into all that for you folks, but just understand the location has to be open to the public. When I say open to the public, I don't mean a place the public can go, like an Applebee's. The public can go there, but Applebee's can say, we don't like the cut of your jib, goodbye. Everybody's welcome at all times, unless they become disruptive. The minutes of a meeting. Minutes shall be promptly recorded and open to public inspection. The promptly recorded thing is the one that usually gets my volunteer board members, because they're like, well, we met in April, and then we didn't meet until September. Did we have to have a meeting just to adopt our minutes in, May? No. The minutes are prepared and recorded as the organization does its business. I've seen a board adopt minutes from a year ago because they hadn't met for a year. They were generally prepared by the clerk long before that, but having them, and that draft is a public record, but when it's approved, that can be at their next meeting. A guideline on minutes, they just have to be a brief summary reflecting the events of the meeting, the substantial events of the meeting. You don't have this here. Some clerks miss their calling as romance novelists and be like, Commissioner Roberts looked on with disapproval. There was a tension in the room. The malaise set over the presiding officer. Tie vote. Everybody left disappointed. You don't need all that. Motions, seconds, the essence of the conversation. For some of you, the minutes might feel like this weird perfunctory thing we do. They really do have value. One, they are considered the official record. So look at them. If it says you said something you definitely didn't say, suggest that you change that, because years from now, it will be deemed what you actually said. And so I've been in a situation in one city where I had to, after 10 years after they adopted a charter provision, I realized that what was posted online was not what they adopted. And the only way I realized that was going back to the minutes from roughly 10 years ago and saying what was done, trying to listen to the meeting, looking at the minutes and determining, oh yeah, what they voted on is not what is on. They posted the draft, not the final. So those minutes really can have value. Or as an example, we received in this community a letter from a civic activist last week about an ordinance and says, oh, the ordinance says this. My first question to Kyle was, can we get a copy of the ordinance and see what they were thinking when they adopted it? What were they trying to address so we can better understand what's at issue here? So those things do become valuable, especially as your leadership can change and you lose some institutional memory in your community. The reasonable opportunity to be heard. Used to be until about 8 or 9 years ago that in Florida, all it provided was what we've talked about. Meetings had to be open to the public, but there was nothing in Florida statutes that said, and they get to talk. And it wasn't until somebody sued and said, this is outrageous. I sit there all night. They never let me talk. It's pointless. And the court that was hearing that case said, I hear you, and I think that there's validity to what you're saying, but the law doesn't say you get that right. So lickety split, they changed the law. And since 2014, members of the public shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard during the decision-making process within reasonable proximity and time before the meeting at which the commission takes the official action. It's a fancy way of saying the public gets a say before you vote. And that's the way that works typically. And your boards, you'll see that. You're open to the public. Okay, before we vote, and you've seen that here for you folks who just love the theater that is the city council meeting. You come and you see, okay, we have an amendment, public comment on the amendment. We have the first reading, public comment on the first reading, second reading, public comment on that, because the public gets a say in the process. So when is that reasonable proximity? I've not seen that tested, and so consequently, most communities do it before each official action. Some communities go way over the top and they do every single thing. We're commending the Boy Scouts. Any public comment? Hurricane preparedness plan, any public comment? The law doesn't quite say that, but it's a way to ensure you never have that issue. It doesn't apply to some things, emergency situations. Hey, we're having Ian's off the coast. We don't need to have 2 hours of public comment on that. We're just trying to meet and disperse. Ministerial acts, you usually don't see public comment on the minutes, ceremonial proclamations. There are some meetings exempt from the Sunshine Law that won't apply to you folks in your subordinate boards. It's mostly for the council where we're in litigation or other things. And then quasi judicial hearings, but there's an exception to that exception, which basically means the public gets to comment anyways, for those of you on the Board of Adjustment. And I'll talk about a quasi judicial hearing. Excuse me. For those of us unfamiliar with what that is in a moment. Any questions so far on public meetings? Yes, sir. So if the Zoom meeting is recorded, if it is a public record, I will tell you that while we have to have minutes, there is actually no legal requirement for most public meetings that there be an audio or video recording. The fact that most communities do that is for our convenience. It's easier to make the minutes if I can listen back to the tape. We do not have a requirement to record a meeting. Similarly, there is no legal requirement, notwithstanding the fact that everybody got super used to it in 2020, that you have remote access to a meeting, whether that be through YouTube, Zoom, or otherwise. Maybe the law will change on that, but right now there's no requirement of that. If a city does it, they do that gratuitously, or because their code requires it. If you can make your own rules, at least for a little while. Tallahassee seems to change that by the minute. But if you don't have anything in your code about it, there's no statutory or constitutional requirement that Zoom access be provided. If you provide it, I recommend that you make that comment feature available for those attending. Again, not a legal requirement. You could say, if you wish to comment, it's an open meeting, come to the meeting. If you wish to observe, we have it that way. You can do that. The question was asked, the last question, sorry, was about recordings and remote participation by the public. The gentleman's second question is on what about board meetings where a member of the board or the council, as it were, appears remotely. The informal guidance on that, you won't see it explicitly in chapter 286, but the way it's been interpreted, and I understand the rationale for it at least, is that in order to have a quorum, which is the basic number of people who need to be here so we can legally have a meeting, you need to have the quorum physically present, and other members can appear remotely if you have a physical quorum. Your own rules of procedure may dictate that as well. In some communities, you can only appear remotely by a majority vote of the council. And if it's not approved, it's an unexcused absence, and X unexcused absences can result in removal and blah, 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 blah. That's a local rule, community to community. But by statute, physical presence must be present for quorum. Any other questions on appearances, video, remote comment, anything? By the way, the rule of thumb, heretical though it may be, for the Sunshine Law is wherever 2 or more are gathered from the same board discussing city business, that's a meeting. And that meeting should be open to the public. I don't know if Jesus is there, but that's a meeting. So if you're meeting with a fellow board member to discuss, hey, we've got this variance, I just kind of wanted to pick your brain because you're an architect. Can you help me understand what they're talking about from the crown of the road and what all that means? Don't do that. Do not meet with your fellow board members to discuss matters that are or may come before you. So for most of the time in your boards, and especially with a board like the CAC, you're usually talking about what I would describe as legislative matters. We just kind of get to make it up. We get to make policy. We decide that it would be wise to have 3% return on this, or an investment, or let's recommend an investment in our parks over our marinas, or whatever. Those are all policy decisions. You have a lot more freedom. With our boards of adjustment, and to some degree our land planning or planning and zoning board, though more rare, you're usually dealing with quasi-judicial hearings, especially with our board of adjustment. Variances, quasi-judicial. Special exceptions, quasi-judicial. Well, Randy, how do I know if I'm in a quasi-judicial hearing? 1, Randy will say so, just to remind you. But 2, You're looking for criteria where there are discernible criteria. The thing that all of you have heard me, some of you have heard me say when I get into a quasi judicial hearing is in a quasi judicial hearing, you are no longer making the law. You're applying the established law to the competent substantial evidence and testimony you hear today. So in order to get a variance, you need to establish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are the criteria. If you think 6 should have been it, oh, well, what does the neighbor say? If your code doesn't say what the neighbor says is a criteria, doesn't matter. We're only looking at these 5 criteria. And then you're waiting for them to talk about it, or hardship unique to the property that they did not create. That is the minimum variance necessary to get the relief and use of the property. Those are what you're looking for. Whether it's going to be pretty is not usually a criteria. It's why I like when an attorney or an architect comes in the hearing, because usually when they come to the hearing, they know they're talking to the criteria. Listen, there's no other evidence to the contrary. I've told you should do it. Staff told you should do it. There's no evidence that says you shouldn't. You should vote in my favor. All the evidence weighs in my favor. When you get somebody who's like, I think this pool would really improve the aesthetics of our coast, and this awning is just beautiful. It's once you see the color blue, it's inspiring, really. That doesn't speak to the criteria. We're no better off for that testimony. And now you're left with just what the staff report says and what you, as a board member, may be able to solicit from them through questions to try and help get them over maybe, or try and determine if they can't get over, right? Let's say, for example, they're applying for a dock and you know that in order to get a dock, you need an established seawall, and they haven't said anything and there's nothing in the materials about their seawall. Then ask, hey, do you have a seawall on this property? Yes, it's been there for 30 years. Great. You're checking a box, right? And they may not realize it, but that's what you're doing. For members who are newer to working with me, you may have heard me advise against, and especially in quasi judicial hearings, advise against site visits or ask you, has any member here done a site visit for the limited purpose of evaluating this application? The reason I ask that is when you're in a quasi judicial hearing, you are kind of like a judge. So you're supposed to be impartial. You're not supposed to be providing evidence. And if you've done a site visit, what you've likely done is gone in pursuit of evidence. And now you're going to put evidence in the record that nobody's testified to. It's just come from the judge. You don't want to go to a red light hearing and say, Judge, Your Honor, it was only read for 2 seconds. Actually, I went there this morning, sir, and as you know, just while I got my Dunkin' Donuts coffee and I watched, it's a 7-second light. You're wrong. It wasn't 7 seconds that day. I don't know what you're talking about, Judge. That's not the evidence. You know, they don't want that anymore in a variance or quasi judicial hearing. If there's information that you know or suspect to be the case, just ask. Ask the staff during their testimony. Ask the applicant or their agent. Solicit the testimony and make your decision based on the record before you. What you can't do in a quasi judicial hearing, what you really shouldn't do, especially with me present, because if I'm already busting out of this shirt and wait till I get mad. No, what you can't do is say, I see that there are 5 criteria here. And I find that all 5 criteria are satisfied. However, as a resident, I find this idea repugnant and I will be voting against it. You just said that they passed the test, but you're giving them an F. That's not how that works. You're not making a policy decision anymore. If there's a policy decision to be made, it should have been made earlier, which is to say, let's say somebody's trying to put in a vape shop over here and you don't want vape shops in your community, address that in your code. Don't decide when somebody comes with entitlements under your code and says, your code says I can have one, I want one, oh, I don't like those. That's not how that works. So you're looking for ascertainable criteria. If there is an appeal or a challenge, they're looking for the 3 things there, and this is what you should be looking at: the competent and substantial evidence, the actual evidence in the record. It's not as high as in a court of law evidence, but there's a difference between, we have a traffic study versus if you approve this, traffic in the city will be terrible. Okay, because you said so. I'm sure you're brilliant, but like, what does that mean? For those of you on the Board of Adjustment and the commission, I will tell our council, I will tell you that every variance hearing, somebody will testify that this is going to fix traffic or ruin traffic, improve property values, destroy property values, or ruin the character of this community forever. And they will never have any evidence to support it. It will just be their opinion every single time. Every now and again, somebody brings an appraiser or an economist or a traffic engineer. Most of the time, that's just an opinion. That is not competent substantial evidence. Absent some document, they don't even have to have a report. They can have photographs, they can have history, images, studies, something to substantiate the position. You want to be looking at procedural due process. Did we give you notice? Did you receive a letter telling you that this hearing was happening today? And you're here, right? Okay, they have notice and they're getting a chance to be heard. That's due process. Essential requirements of law. Are we looking at the right section of our code? If we're here on fences, we can't make a decision based on our code about basketball hoops. We got to be looking at the right sheet of music. Ignoring criteria or evidence can lead to a policy decision and lead to litigation, which fine. I've got kids who got to go to school, by all means. I say that in jest. We want to avoid litigation. That's why I'm here. This is risk management on some level. And if we ignore the guidance we receive here, that's how we set ourselves up for litigation that we don't need. I'd much prefer that things continue to run smoothly in this community. And that's part of why we're doing all of this. Sometimes I'm asked, Randy, you're talking about evidence. How much evidence do I need? I've heard this beyond a reasonable doubt, standard. That ain't it. Here it's competent substantial evidence. You need a scintilla of evidence. So what happens if the city produces some study saying traffic will be terrible, and the applicant produces a study saying this will fix all your problems and you'll be well on your way to utopia if you do this for traffic? You have competing evidence. And the cool thing is you get to decide which evidence you find more credible. That's up to you. You're the judge. I've been in hearings that say, well, Randy, staff said this, but the applicant's saying that. What do I do? You make a decision. Which one do you find more persuasive? I love when there's competing evidence because it basically means either decision is going to be right. But if somebody comes in with if staff and the applicant are saying the same thing and nobody says anything to the contrary, where are you getting this from? That it's going to ruin traffic? What evidence are you basing that on? I say that as well. When you're making your decision on a quasi-judicial hearing, look at the criteria and ground your decision in the criteria. Something that you might have thought was going to look ugly might be better stated that this is not the minimum variance necessary. They're asking for 10 feet, and I'm not convinced they couldn't do this with 3. Same result, but it's better if it's legally sustainable if you're actually speaking to the criteria. Any question on quasi-judicial hearings? It's a bit of a deviation from the standard sunshine law stuff, but especially for my Board of Adjustment members, this should be a little bit old hat, but it's very, very critical to understanding why we do what we do. Any questions there? All right, moving right along. Just like in the public records law, there are consequences for violating the sunshine law. It can be a violation to attend a statute knowing that it's a violation. Conducting a meeting outside the state in violation of the law. It's not unlawful to have a sunshine law meeting out of the state, but if this is more prevalent in our communities closer to Georgia and Alabama, if you just go across state lines and it doesn't count, we're in a different area code. That's not a thing. It's still a meeting of your body. And we can be assessed attorney's fees. I do want to go through a few examples just to drive this home. In one community, restroom conversation between city officials raises sunshine question. In that scenario, 2 council members on a break go to the restroom, men's restroom, and while they're talking at the urinals, there's a reporter in one of the stalls and notices that they're actually talking about business, which actually violates 2 laws. The first one, the sunshine law, and the second, you're not supposed to talk at the urinal. The second one, in 2011, the governor removed a city commissioner and others resigned after an investigation revealed they discussed city issues in 2 separate private meetings. The elected officials had to pay fines and court costs. I traveled the state teaching this stuff to communities all over. In one community in North Florida, they told me, yeah, as far as up to like early 1990s, the council would get together at the Perkins or the Denny's the week before the meeting and just kind of hash it all out so the meeting could be efficient. Like, well, that was an efficient violation of the sunshine law. County commissioner and Florida senator was jailed for 6 days and paid a $500 fine for discussing business in private with other commissioners. So don't do that. As I mentioned, in 2020, we got very comfortable with Zoom and other digital platforms for access. Another consequence of that was we got a little more lackadaisical in our adherence to the sunshine law, and we saw a few more violations. When a city sought $31,645 from a sunshine law lawsuit defendant, that was where an official they defended him on the front end and he was found in violation, and they said, well, we don't pay for you to break the law. pay us back. Another one, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement ended an investigation in Sunshine Law by Manatee County Commissioners in relation to the termination of the county administrator. Most instances when a charter official, that's me, Kyle, Patty, the people who are appointed by the council, when they get terminated, almost immediately somebody says it's a Sunshine Law violation. It might be, because it's hard to conceive how 3 people or maybe more can reach that same conclusion without having talked about it. But it does happen. In this particular case, there were some text messages between 2 officials, and they said something like, on Tuesday, do you want to do the first thing or the second thing? Like, full analyze this if you've seen that movie. Not the second thing, let's do the first thing. And then when they were asked about it, they said, oh, we were coordinating our ties for the meeting. It was nothing to see here, which I'm sure is exactly what was happening. A mayor entered a no contest plea, paid $100 fines to settle a Sunshine Law violation case. That one was interesting because they were interviewing, the city officials were interviewing somebody for a position. And it was in the hallway. They said, hey, have you met with Sandy yet? I think she's really top notch. Make sure to give her a good look. That was it. Just, hey, I think that's a promising candidate. Sunshine Law violation. Somebody overheard it, or it was otherwise captured. Violation. So being mindful that you're not talking about business even casually that way. This is my favorite one. I'm going to spend a moment on this. This is a recent case study. Let's do a little bit of world building. Go back to March 2020. Some very major world events are happening. The NBA is shutting down the league. Other people are starting to take notice. Now the NHL is doing it. Maybe society needs to do something. We have it's the initiation of the COVID pandemic in the United States. And there was a meeting scheduled in a city of Florida called Sebastian. And normally I try not to use the names. I'm going to use the names here because I can. I got special dispensation from the league when I teach on this. There was a meeting scheduled for, it was like mid-March or early April. And the day before the meeting, the manager says, you know what? I'm looking around, folks. I don't think this is a good idea. We're going to cancel this meeting. So on the eve of the meeting, they cancel the meeting. Well, 3 of the council members say, like fun, we're canceling that meeting. I'm going. So 3 members come into a dimly lit, just the flood lighting city hall with 12 of their supporters, and they call a meeting. They've got a quorum. So they call a meeting, and during the time that had previously been noticed but canceled. And then they proceed to fire the city attorney, fire the city manager, fire the city clerk, declare one of them to be the mayor now. And then you hear somebody say, and this is on YouTube, I encourage you to watch it. It's fun. It's brief. One of you hear somebody on the camera say, hurry, I think the cops are coming. They adjourn the meeting. The consequence of that was later, some months later, when this was all investigated and resolved, they had a recall vote in their community. It was the first, as best I can tell, successful recall in the history of the state of Florida. There's been many a recall vote. It's very hard to recall an elected official. There's like 2 and 3 steps to it. They succeeded. But not only did they succeed, they recalled a majority of their council. They voted out 3 of the people, not during a regular election, but off cycle. And it was the first time in the United States the majority of a sitting council was removed, as best as I can tell. 2 council members were actually tried and convicted of crimes for this. Why wasn't the 3rd? 2 words, state's evidence. They turned and testified to how that all happened and how it went down. Not content to have just violated the Sunshine Law, one of the 2 of them actually lied to the investigating officers and otherwise. So then they got brought up on perjury and obstruction charges, got their son involved. It was really fun. Whole family affair. The reason I'm willing to speak to this is one of those officials, one who was actually declared mayor, I believe, which by the way is not a thing. An action in violation of the Sunshine Law is void ab initio, meaning it's like it never happened. It's like they were playing Dungeons and Dragons in mommy's basement. It's not a real thing. And so the reason I'm comfortable talking about this is that individual sat through this presentation from me and my partner, Jay, and then called us after the fact and was like, hey, I told him, I watched your presentation, we could do this. We're like, no. It was kind of exciting for me because I was fortunate enough to meet my wife in high school, which is to say I haven't dated. I haven't really had the luxury of getting to ghost somebody, but I definitely ghosted that guy. There's no response to that. You violated the law. That's not what we said in our presentation. The state attorney's office actually contacted us wanting to depose us. By happenstance, that presentation was recorded and it was provided to them, and they were satisfied with that and realized that we said no such thing. But I say that to say, I will not be happy if you leave this with the takeaway that you can just do whatever you want. That's not how the sunshine law works. That's not why I've taken your Wednesday night. So understand that there can be real consequences. I think this is, as best as I can tell, the most severe punishment. One sentenced to an estimated 6 months in jail, another 30 days, but that was because there were other violations. Like I mentioned, the perjury, obstruction, and other stuff. But that's the most severe thing I've seen attendant to a sunshine law violation. So any violation of the sunshine law, as I said, the action you've taken is void ab initio. It's stricken down. Some folks you just can't reach, right? And so you get what they get here, and they get stricken down. So a commission's failure, this was a case out of the city of St. Pete Beach, where the commission's failure to comply with notice requirements that govern the adoption of municipal ordinance led to the ordinance being declared null and void. For my LPA, P, and Z members, that ordinance was the ordinance adopting their comprehensive plan. Big deal. So they had to start over on their comp plan, which, as we're going through right now, you recognize takes some time and deliberate effort. There are some exceptions. We're not going to get into them here, but just like with the confidentiality and exemption provisions for the public records law, there are some limited exceptions. If you do like an active shooter drill for your council, you don't need to notice and publish all of that. If we're in litigation talking settlement, there's going to be a court reporter in the room, but the meeting is closed while we talk about it. And then that court reporter transcript becomes a public record later. And then it's as if the meeting was open. So there are some exceptions. Technology is not a way out. If an official act is taken or public business is being transacted or discussed, it's a meeting. The fact that we were just texting. We didn't meet. We just texted about whether or not we would be voting on this. That's still a meeting. Leaving the napkin in the mailbox back and forth, still a meeting. I have a bullet there that says beware social media comment threads. For those of you unfamiliar with the interface, if you get on Facebook especially, and let's say we post tonight, come vote on beach renourishment, come tonight, the council's discussing beach renourishment, something that's sure to draw, some interest in your community. What if let's say there's 300 comments on that post? What Facebook does is it will show you maybe comment number 1 and 2, and then it has the ellipses, or what one of my friends calls drama dots, ... and then it's comment number 299 and 300. Well, let's say comment number 5 is Councilmember Roberts saying, beach renourishment, we don't need this. Our community is fine how it is. It's built to withstand this. We'll be fine. I am not going to be supporting this at all. Not his stance at all, folks, just a hypothetical. But let's say he's number 5. He becomes part of the ellipses. And then comment number 299, Councilmember Mora gets on there and says, absolutely, I support this. Anybody who doesn't would be a fool. This is what our community needs. Looking forward to our council moving in the right direction tonight. I may never have seen Lloyd's post, but it is in a publicly available thread. And you know who did see it? Everybody who's at home with plenty of time, which is plenty of people in a community with a lot of retirees or otherwise. So just know that you might not have known, but everybody else noticed. And so just be careful again when we talked about static and dynamic records. When you're making public posts on threads, you can run into those pitfalls. Similarly, when we talked about quasi-judicial hearings, I told you you're supposed to be impartial. If you go on public media or social media and say, as long as I'm a member of this board, we will never, ever approve a variance for anything above the established height in our code, I cannot be persuaded. And somebody comes with a variance application for height, they may be able to get you recused from that because you've made it clear you cannot impartially review the evidence. Maybe they have a very good reason. Maybe their property undulates and to stabilize it, they need to go 2 feet higher. Maybe, I don't know. But there may be factors and then they could argue that. So being mindful that you're putting yourself out there. There's a last bullet at the bottom called the first bite of the apple. This is a little bit of an admonition and a little bit of advice. In some communities, I've experienced the council member or board member who sends what I call the Friday night Merlot manifesto. You've had a tough week. You had a tough meeting. You got some things on your mind and people need to know them. And man, this is having earthy tones and it's just making you feel a little salty. So you send a 3-page email to every member of your board and let them know what's on your mind. And in that, you have no problem saying the city attorney is a coward, the manager's incompetent, the clerk is just doing whatever that incompetent manager says, and this board has no character, no integrity. Thank God I'm here to try and preserve some sense. And the next time we vote on something like this, we'll do the right thing. Is that a sunshine law violation? Maybe not. There's no meeting of the minds. You're just kind of shouting into the void. Now, it's not really the void. The void has the 4 other people who can commit a sunshine law violation standing in front of you, right? The problem is that it's an invitation to a violation. It's building the foundation of a violation. And just as salty as you felt, invariably, there's that one person who will not let this injustice stand. I don't mind what they said about me, but Kyle shouldn't have to take that. I'm going to go for Kyle's dignity and start responding. And now we've got a thread. Now we definitely have a meeting. Now we have a potential sunshine law violation. Unless we're just arguing whether it's like go to guppies or go to seaweed. Okay, that's not really a sunshine law issue. But if we're talking about our community and what we're doing here, that's a problem. So please don't write the Merlot Manifesto. Get some therapy, but also just be mindful that that can present an issue. And if you see that and you say they violated the sunshine law, maybe not, but they definitely made it a lot easier for everybody else to do so or to be a part of a violation. Social and personal relationships, I do really want to emphasize this. It's not a problem. All you board members, you could be 5 members from the same fraternity who went to college together. You could all be married, be a throuple, I don't care. But you cannot discuss public business when you're hanging out socially or living romantically or whatever it is you do. I don't know how healthy that makes your personal relationships, but there's a whole topic you just can't touch. I know I give the example again, I don't know why it's always in Applebee's. I get a call like once a year, hey, there was that really tough meeting and afterwards I was on 19 and I saw Kyle and the mayor and this other council member and they were all sitting at a booth in the back corner of Applebee's. I think I saw a sunshine law violation. Great, what were they talking about? I don't know, but they looked upset. Okay, it's maybe not a good look, but I don't know what they were discussing. I had, without betraying too much, I had one situation where there was a pretty controversial meeting. The meeting adjourned kind of late, not here, definitely not here, adjourned kind of late. And as people emptied out, there were 2 council members and I think the manager left in the room. And they were in that room for another 20 minutes. And some people lingered in the parking lot. And as people left, because it was late, the door was locking behind them. So there were 2 council members and the manager locked behind closed doors 20 minutes after a meeting. That's a sunshine law violation. I said, do you know what they were discussing? I don't know, but it was pretty intense. So, okay, you're just body language? Yeah, I didn't hear a word. Okay. So I had to ask, because listen, I don't have evidence of a sunshine law violation yet, but you can appreciate why after that particular controversial meeting, that probably wasn't a great idea. And one was like, yeah, it probably wasn't. We were talking about our divorces. But we are all still human people. You can have human interactions. Just be mindful that as you're having them, you're not talking about business. You guys can be golf buddies on the P&Z board. The CAC members can go water skiing for all I care. Just don't talk about city business. If we commit a violation, it can be fixed. The solution for a sunshine law violation, you start over. And not all, you start over. Not every sunshine law violation is incurable. Most of them are curable. My sister happens to be a physician. To much disappointment in my family, she did not become a lawyer. No, she's a physician, and every now and again she has to sit through a med mal practice training. And she asked me, Randy, what was it about? It's so disappointing to the family that you made a living doing this. Tell me what the cliff notes are. And every time I tell her, it's the same thing I tell my public officials. There are 3 rules to doing this job right. 1, don't screw up. 2, you're human, you're going to screw up. When you do, don't hide it. Cure it. The 3rd, and this is really important for us in public service, I have this affliction myself. Just because someone says you screwed up doesn't mean you screwed up. You may face accusations that are just not meritless. The second part is what's important here. The other joke I have with my sister is nobody dies on my table. We just make amendments. So in this case, if we had a meeting, if this meeting was supposed to be open, but it turns out all the doors are locked, we just have it again. And we don't have it again. We don't call to order and say, hey, that meeting we had, everybody remember? Great, adjourned. You do the whole thing over again. If we had voted on an ordinance, especially. Alternatively, let's say an ordinance on second reading is supposed to be advertised in the paper. This happened to me as recently as a year ago, not here, where you got on second reading, we adopted it, and then after the fact, I go to fill out the sheets and said, hey, when did this run in the paper? This is supposed to run in the paper? I thought I sent it. Let me find it. Oh, you know what? It never got sent. It never ran in the paper. All right, we're doing second reading again next month. You just fix it. You don't say, who's going to notice? It'll be fine. Because that's how 5 years later, something that's super important to you gets invalidated. So just do it right. If it was important enough to do the first time, it's important enough to do it right. So that's the best process. You can cure a violation. Again, in review for us on public meetings, it's notice, location, and minutes. Any questions on the sunshine law? I'll be very quick with you. I do want to touch on another. I'm not going to go into a slide deck. I'm not going to keep you here much longer. But I do want to touch very briefly on the ethics code, chapter 112. When we talk about ethics in Florida, when we talk about it this way, we're not talking about Jiminy Cricket. We're not talking about WWJD. We're just talking about what some mostly dead people wrote in a law book some years ago, and we amended from time to time. We're talking about chapter 112 of the Florida statutes. So sometimes the ethics code might not align with your moral code, and that's okay. It's just what you have to do. And so under chapter 112, there's a few things that we focus on. The big one for you folks, gifts. Don't accept anything of value that could be construed to have been given to you to influence your votes and your official acts. And that the test really comes down to what could influence you. It could be a penny if you're a penny collector. The fact that it's generally worth 1 cent does not change the analysis. So not soliciting and receiving gifts. As I said early on, there's no special perks to this office. You get what the public gets. If there are let's say there's jet ski lifts out here in the water. They're not, but let's say there were. Well, you're moving and you got nowhere to put your jet ski. And it costs $100 a month to put a jet ski there. And you go to Kyle, I see there's 3 empty lifts. I'm moving over the next 2 months. I'm just going to put my jet ski there for free. And if somebody comes to use it, just let me know, I'll move it. And then it should be out of there in 2 months. No, the public pays $100 a month to put a jet ski there. You pay $100 a month to put a jet ski there. There are no special perks. There's no inroads. This is not having a friend who works for the Miami Heat. There's no backdoor access. There is no, but for my job. If you are in a position where you're saying, if I wasn't a volunteer with the city, I wouldn't be getting this, or getting paid if you're a council member, you may wish to start your analysis and start wondering, why is this happening to me? And is this a problem for ethics reasons? That's the cliff notes there. Conversely, don't pull the whole, do you know who I am? Let's say you're leaving here tonight and you're just dying to get that rotisserie chicken we've been talking about. You weren't now, but the guy said it like 3 times. So you need a rotisserie chicken. And then you get pulled over going over the bridge. Say, officer, license and registration, please. License, registration, no problem. Here you go, officer. And what's that? Is that my business card that says I'm a city commissioner attached? How'd that get there? You'd be surprised how much that happens. Do not pull the do you know who I am. I will tell you very quickly, as my mother often tells me, you ain't nobody. You are just another person. So do not pull a do you know who I am, not at the chili cook-off, not at the IRB Beach Fest, certainly not out in the great wide world. You are a volunteer here in service of the public trust. And that's really what I want to touch on with ethics. When we talk about ethics in our Florida Constitution and in our statutes, chapter 112, it repeats the refrain that you hold your office as a public trust. You hold it not for your benefit, but for the benefit of your community. And if you find yourself in a position where you are getting the benefit and not the public, that's the problem. And I don't mean incidentally. I don't mean, hey, you get a stipend for having sat at this meeting. That's not the issue. I get paid for my time here, but I still have an obligation to your residents to fulfill my duties faithfully and honestly. And that's really where the issue becomes. If you're starting, I'm out here, I don't really care that this would be good for the community. I'm voting for short-term rentals because it's my business I'm going to have here. And I have a whole business operation. That's what this is for. That's not really me doing my job. If I'm advising you because I see an angle for me, I should be doing what makes sense for your community at large. And that's really the charge here. What I'll leave you with in a general sense, and this is just a personal plea. I'm obviously, in addition to being devilishly handsome, slightly younger than some of you. I'm 37. I've not been doing this long or long enough to say that it didn't used to be this way, but it didn't used to be this way. When we talk about our civil discourse, It is critical, especially in a community like this, that we continue to do what we were taught, hopefully, so long ago in ethics, and disagree without being disagreeable. In addition to traveling and speaking on this, I talk on parliamentary procedure and meetings. And the one thing that I emphasize is when you're coming to these meetings, debate the measure, the issue on the table, not the motive, not the member. Don't attack your peers. Don't attack the public. Attack the idea. If you're against the idea, fine. If you give advice today and you say, I didn't find that effective, that presentation was not helpful to me, that's one thing. To get out there and then say, that attorney's corrupt, and I think he was doing that because he knows that when we do this and he set us up to fail so that he can just have more lawsuits or something like that. That's not great. It's not great for you folks as officials when somebody comes up here and says, oh, that Ron, he used to, sorry, man, I happen to know you slightly personally. He used to work for a bank. Of course, we're doing municipal finance loans and bonds now, self-serving. No, he's got an expertise and he's using his life's work and passion to serve the community in a way that he thinks is helpful. If you disagree with him, disagree on the measure. That's not him being evil. I will tell you that there's a internet aphorism of sorts that says, do not mistake for malice that which can be explained by incompetence. So many people are quick to establish that there's some great conspiracy out in the world. Sometimes we just make mistakes. And yes, people are collateral damage in those mistakes, and that is unfortunate. No one should have those misfortunes, but they happen. It's not happening at you, it just happened. We happened to forget to open City Hall at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and you showed up, but we knew you were coming that day and we didn't want your application. No, just somebody forgot their alarm. My wife's alarm today, her phone would not turn on. Don't know why. Missed my alarm, almost made my kids late to school. It wasn't because we didn't want them to see that class, and so just understanding that as we talk about our dialogue, one of the things that was missing from your public meetings presentation was read the agenda before you get there. So you know what the issues are, so you can do the job better. But also then when you get there, you understand that this is all about policy and life's too important to reduce to personal attacks on one another. And if I could ask one favor of you, and that's not because of something that happened here. I give this speech everywhere because it's my one opportunity to be a little bit on a soapbox. I think that we do our residents and our guests, our visitors, a disservice when we continue to devolve the dialogue and go into just retreating to factions. It's no secret that I'm the city attorney in Indian Rocks Beach. Right now, they're wrestling with a really tough issue that's being wrestled with globally, short-term rentals. And in some ways, it's reduced to factions, homes, not hotels versus we love our visitors. And what's happened is every public comment, somebody gets up there, and whether they own a short-term rental or they've been a resident for 20 years, the first 2 minutes of their speech is about how they're actually a good person who should be listened to, which is unfortunate. We should start from that premise. Yes, I'm a short-term rental operator. I have 2 kids. I take care of my elderly mother. And we shouldn't have to do this just to prove that you're worth listening to. All of us are. Let's just do that. And let's go about our process. With that in mind, are there any questions about anything we discussed or something you thought we discussed that we didn't address? One last topic I do need to hit on is voting conflicts. It's usually in my ethics presentation, not my sunshine law. If you are present for a meeting, you have a statutory obligation to vote. If you are present for a meeting, you have a statutory obligation to vote. That thing you see in Tallahassee and DC where they waive, vote present or abstain, you don't have that option unless you have a voting conflict. And a voting conflict is narrowly defined as something that makes your money go up or down in a tangible way, not a speculative way. The reason I'm giving you this advice is when I was a wee bit baby municipal lawyer, one of my first meetings I went to, I did know that you had to vote and you couldn't abstain. And it was truly like one of the first 5 meetings I covered. And the official goes, oh, I'm abstaining on a variance. Well, why? Well, the applicant is my landlord on my commercial property. Is the commercial property you own part of this plaza? No, clear other side of town. Okay, so why is that a conflict? Well, if I vote in favor of it, and I get favorable rent terms, people will say that that was my conflict. And if I vote against it, maybe he makes my rent go up to kind of turn the nails on me a little bit. That's screws, not nails. I do know how those things work. That's not a voting conflict. Oh, well, we're parishioners at the same church, not a voting conflict. Our kids played Little League for 5 years together, not a voting conflict. It's really about your financial interest in the result. Yes, this is for a development of 3 homes, and I own one of those 3 homes. I am the architect who designed the project. those sorts of things. Those are voting conflicts. Voting conflicts are not things that are like, I just feel uncomfortable and I'd rather not. That goes back to my thank you. The process doesn't work if you folks don't do the hard things. Thank you for doing the hard things. Thank you for sitting here tonight and giving me your time. I'm not going to rush out if any of you have side questions, but yes, sir.
One question, is your presentation
Are my, excuse me, are my slides proprietary? Great question. If I wanted them to be, I shouldn't use them at a public meeting because that makes them a public record. So I will happily send them to you. I will send them to Kyle and Patty, and anybody who wishes to have them can request them or they can distribute them as they see appropriate. I will tell you that this particular version of the presentation, as you can see in the title, is from 2021. There's some limited updates that are not in there, but generally speaking, if you see something in there, it should be, reiterate what we've spoken about today. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time, folks. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you for your patience.